indifference of those who should have known better, the silence of the voice of justice when it mattered the most, that has made it possible for evil to triumph. Do you know who said that? No, it was Haile Selassie. All right? In every society, you know, my mother was from Mexico, my father's family. My father was born here, but his family was from London, Liverpool. There's always someone that emerges throughout the history that has courage, that inspires, right? Mexico was Benito Juárez. Benito Juárez said, el derecho al respeto ajeno es la paz. The rights of each and every one of us is peace, right? Abraham Lincoln, you think of Selassie, you think of Ataturk, someone that came, spoke out, inspired, and made people aware. And that's a very critical element, because right now, when I was asking one of my friends, who is an agent on the ground, he said the two most important things when you think about the core of the problem is tribalism and corruption. Tribalism and corruption. He said, do you know, BQ, that the North Koreans are working closely and have built 2 armament plants in Ethiopia? Now that's totally against the UN, the sanctions, the problem right there. But people are living in fear, they're afraid, and you know, they're worried that there's gonna be some drone that'll come to their house and bomb their house and kill their family. How do you rise above the fear? When I was a governor and we had, was overseeing Voice of America, we had the Persian service broadcasting into Iran. We had requests from people saying, can you possibly create a series that would instruct our people, teach them how the American Revolution, how those leaders, those young people came together to be able to rally, to create a situation that caused the revolution. We were able to create a constitution. Because right now, you have this core, you've got, you know, the problem with the Ethiopians is they're living in fear. They're being completely controlled by it. And you have, you know, somebody said to me, what's very important are the 3 T's, BQ. That's my nickname. Because in Texas, you know, my whole name is Maria de Guadalupe Blanquita Delvina Walsh Columtona La Segunda, okay? A sus órdenes. And in a radio station, when I was first going into broadcasting, they said, well, Darwin, what's your name? I said, well, Blanquita. They said, oh, no, Darwin, if you can't fit it on a belt buckle, well, we can't say it. So they cut it in half. My nickname is BQ. So somebody said to me, BQ, the 3 T's are very important. And that is trade, travel, and telecommunications. And that's important in any country that's going to exist. Well, how do you empower a nation in fear? How do you teach them? How do you inspire them? How can they communicate in private when they're being monitored? You know, when I think about the questions you were talking about, how the news is being reported, very brave, what you had to encounter. You know, I say that, you know, you have a golden rule about every religion has a golden rule, do unto others as you would do unto them. All right, yourself, right? That's the golden rule. The golden rule in reporting is seek the truth and report it. That's a tough golden rule, and you've experienced it. You've suffered it. And so the question is, you know, and I've had, you know, I'm old enough to have met some people in my life. When I was in San Antonio, and I worked for a company that owned the Apollo Theater, and we started the first Martin Luther King March in the 1980s. And so we brought in a little lady that was very famous in the civil rights movement, and that was Rosa Parks. And I asked Ms. Parks, because she was a tiny little lady. She wasn't some big, tough prod. She was a little woman. And I said to her, Ms. Parks, where'd you get the courage to tell them no? And she said, well, darling, I was just tired. Okay? That's part of how a revolution starts. You've had enough. You don't want to, you dump the tea in the river, you stand up and you say, we're not going to take it anymore. In Mexico, they were not going to be overseen by the French or the Spanish. They wanted to be independent. How do revolutions start? They start a lot with the young people, because the young people, they still have the courage. They haven't been beaten up. They understand the stakes. They're having kids. They want to have a life. So right now, I certainly am honored to sit with all of you, and I look at this tribalism and this corruption that's going on, and frankly, think about it. You know, I'm a broadcaster, but how many people in this country, and I'm talking around the entire country, understand Africa? How many countries in Africa? Can they name a leader in Africa? Why? Why is that? Why don't they do it? Whose fault is it? Well, we can say it's our fault, but we've got a lot going on in the world. You know, Africa's not the only group of countries that we're dealing with right now. We got Europe. We've got, you name it, Middle East, we've got Cuba. Cuba's down, it hasn't got oil. But who is in there that's making a difference, really making a difference, is China. China's getting in there even with North Korea. Because one of the things that I learned as the chairman of Radio Free Asia, when you talk about Korea, who's pulling the strings in North Korea? If the Chinese go and say, do a little test, do a little atomic test, make them do this. It's China. So if North Korea has a strong presence in making a difference in what's happening, whereas in Ethiopia they're willing to, this corrupt government is willing to risk the sanctions of the United Nations, how important is the role of China? China's everywhere. China's in the Darien Pass. You know, a lot of people don't realize that there were over 10,000 young Chinese men dumped on the Darien Pass, going around. Why? Coming through the United States. You know, a lot of people complain about ICE, but you know, I'm a co-founder of Voices Against Trafficking. You know how much the cartels make in human trafficking a month? Over $1 billion. You don't think that's important to kind of figure out who's coming across the border? It's more than just drugs, it's human trafficking. I'm sure they have huge human trafficking in Ethiopia. You know, when you think about the neighbors over there, what kind of neighbors? You got South Sudan, you got Sudan. Sudan still has slavery for crying out loud. You know, we talk about civil war and civil rights and all that stuff. They still have slavery right now, okay? How does that affect Ethiopia? That's the neighborhood. You got a rough neighborhood. So how do you engage in creating a situation where this country, our country, should know about it? I mean, think about Ethiopia. Heck, are you kidding? One of the most famous movies, Indiana Jones, trying to find the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Where's the Lost Ark? It's in Ethiopia, right? You have to find a way for the world to understand the stakes. You've got the entire core of religion that started in that country, whether it was Christianity, land of the Bible, whether you've got the situation with the Muslims or the Jews, right there in that country. What are the stakes? How do you make it so the rest of the world understands why that country is important? Now, you got a lot of smarter brains than me that can talk about what's going to be important in that Constitution. Clearly, the Bill of Rights has got to play in that so that everyone has an equal chance. Every country knows that. Just trying to make sure a lot of pressure is put upon that. And where Ethiopia is situated and what's going on, why does that make a difference? Right now, think about it. A lot of criminal activity going, a lot of brutality against Christians. Look at Nigeria. Are you kidding me? That's just monstrous to think about. In this country, we have the ability to fight about things like we're not doing this right, we're not doing that right. Because you know what? Pretty much every day we get up, we live okay. Okay? We have that liberty to have that discussion. We got a freedom of speech. We can disagree with each other. We can pick on each other, call each other names, and humiliate each other, or we can stand up for each other, because we've got it. But countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, all these other places that are suffering, they don't get how come we don't get involved. So gentlemen like this man who's put it on the line, he's really taken the risk, very brave. Now how do we like that inspiration to have the Benito Juarez's and the Ataturks and the Selassies and those people arise from the ashes to stand up and speak? Because movements, we sit there and we think it's all in here. You know where it is? It's right here. It's in your heart. Even when we have our own elections, who are the ones that we elect? Sometimes they're not even great. Sometimes they're real great. But you know what it is? They're moved by the heart. They're moved by what the stakes are. What's going to be different if we can get somebody there that's going to inspire the people? Because you've got a nation in Ethiopia of brilliant, wonderful, diverse human beings. A lot of tribalism going on. People are going to have to put that down. They're going to have to figure out how they can work together to save that country. And throw the North Koreans out. Throw those people out they're going to cause more problems and sanctions and divisions and humiliation and strife. They're going to have to be brave. They're going to have to be brave like this guy who went in there despite the fact it compromised his ability to get in the country. It was banned. Well, what are you willing to do for freedom? What is it going to take? How are you going to frame it? And it's going to be important for you all that are here to get to know the members of Congress, get to know the important leaders that are on radio and television. That's why it was important to interview him to talk about what's going on in Ethiopia. And you got to move the heart, the mind, the soul, because that inspires courage. Remember in the famous movie, The Wizard of Oz? Remember the lion goes over there and he's talking, what do they got that we ain't got? Courage. And you need courage. But you sure have a great country. And think about everything we can help to be able to inspire people to really get to the heart and soul of how to save that country. And the art, history, faith, all that beauty, all the attributes that you have, everything that works for you. Interestingly enough, despite the evil's real smart. Evil knows how to con you. Evil knows how to make you feel afraid to come out of your house. Evil makes you think that they're very smooth and more important than you, and they're bigger than you, but they're just bullies. So, I encourage you